Hello everyone, my name is Anirudh Shankar and I'm very happy to present our talk at this conference titled as Training Spiking Neural Networks with a Multi-Agent Evolutionary Robotics Framework. So let me briefly introduce myself and my co-authors. So Dr. Das works as a staff scientist within the Physics and Astronomy department here at Purdue and is the first author of this paper. I currently work as a data scientist for Sabre and graduated with a master's degree in May of 2021 from the School of Industrial Engineering here at Purdue. Dr. Aggarwal was my advisor here, and he's also an associate professor within the School of Industrial Engineering here at Purdue. So I would lastly like to thank the authors as well as the reviewers of this conference for providing us feedback as well as giving us the opportunity to present our talk here at this conference. So let me proceed with the outline of this talk. So I'll firstly introduce the topic and then move forward to talking about our problem, our novel contributions, the experimental setup, the algorithms, and finally moving on to the evaluations and conclusion. So shown on the left is the world's first fastest supercomputer named Fugaku, and shown on the right is our human brain. So the world's fastest supercomputer consumes 26 megawatts, while our brain only consumes 20 watts, which is just a minuscule of the power consumed by the supercomputer. And our entire thinking ability is governed just by this 20 watts. So this has propelled the motivation to build energy efficient computers as well as energy efficient systems. The problem statement that we're specifically looking at is looking to train spiking neural networks under multi-agent evolutionary robotics or ER framework. So the reason why we are interested in spiking neural networks is that these are special kind of neural networks which, when implemented on neuromorphic hardware, can be extremely energy efficient. And the challenge that we face in this problem is that there exists no current supervised learning algorithm based on gradient descent to train spiking neural networks due to the non-differentiable nature of these spikes. And the solution we provide here is to train them using under an evolutionary robotics framework. So let me briefly introduce the idea of evolutionary robotics and spiking neural networks at a surface level, and then we can explore in more detail about it. So evolutionary robotics is an integration of evolutionary computation and robotics. So instead of training a robot for every possible action in a scenario, we let the control of the bot evolve and produce necessary behavior to sustain itself in this environment. And spiking neural networks, on the other hand, are a special kind of neural network that operate on discrete events known as spikes. And we also explore about spiking neural networks in detail later. Yeah, if you need more information on both of these topics, they have been mentioned in our paper. So what is a spiking neural network? They're a special kind of neural network that are more brain-like in a sense that they operate on discrete events known as spikes. Every spiking neuron has two very important properties. One is a membrane potential and another one is the threshold potential. So whenever the membrane potential of the spiking neuron exceeds the threshold potential, it fires a spike. The way it receives input spikes and fires output spikes happens in a complex fashion and is usually described by differential equations. Shown below is a differential equation describing the dynamics of a spiking neuron, and the details of it will be discussed later. So let's get to the problem definition first. So we have multiple agents or bots in an environment, and we need to train them to capture foods. So if we were to treat this as a regular supervised learning problem, we would need to map multiple snapshots of the environment and then label actions accordingly. We would then need to train them using some algorithm, and this would be an artist task since it would involve labeling data as well as training SNNs efficiently. And as seen before, training SNNs is not a trivial task. So let's now talk about the novel contributions of this work. So the first novel contribution is the demonstration of a multi-agent ER framework, which is inspired by competition to train these networks. The second one is that we provide a quantitative characterization of evolutionary learning by fitting punctuated equilibria to logistic curves. And the third one is that we also establish a comparison between the performances of variants of evolutionary algorithms for training these SNNs. So shown here is the entire system model. So we have an environment at the highest level, and within the environment, we have entities. So there are two types of entities. One is a food and another is a bot. And each bot has a brain of its own, which is a spiking neural network, and each neuron within this brain is actually a spiking neuron. The details of each of these components will be discussed in the later slides. So, talking about the bot, each bot occupies a position and an angular orientation of theta within the environment. And each bot has three very important parameters: a brain, a visual angle, and a spontaneous firing rate. The concept of a spontaneous firing rate will be discussed when we get to the neuron section. So each bot has a field of view that is divided into 9 zones. Six of these zones actually serve as sensory inputs or sensory neurons to allow the bot to sense food in its field of view. And four motor neurons actually control the movement of the bot. Bots can actually have four actions. They can either move forward, backward, rotate clockwise, or anti-clockwise by zero point 0.1 radians. Each bot has a spiking neural network, or each bot has a brain which is represented by a spiking neural network. And each spiking neural network in our case consists of 30 neurons in a fully connected directed network. And unlike an artificial neural network, this SNN does not have layers and the connectivity is allowed to evolve. The network also does, the network also does not have any recurrent connections initially, and the synaptic weight denotes the strength of the synapse between two neurons. So the entire connectivity matrix or the entire connectivity of this network is described by a weight matrix that will be shown later. And so the brain has six sensory neurons which take inputs from the environment, and four motor neurons control the bot's movement. And the dynamics of each neuron are presented in the later slide. Let's now talk about the dynamics of the spiking neuron itself. I'll try to describe the working of the neuron in a very intuitive manner. To get more detail about it, you can read the details in the paper. So each part is controlled by a SNN, and each individual spiking neuron is a leaky integrated and fire neuron. The leaky integrated and fire neuron model is described by the differential equation as it's given here. In our model, we approximate this LIF by using a difference equation, and let me try to put it in a very simple manner. Each input spike increases the potential of our neuron, as shown in this, as shown by the blue curve. And this, uh, although it increases the potential by a factor of Q of t, it also leaks by some factor, which in our case is 1%. The charge Q of t is in itself a weighted sum of spikes from the presynaptic neurons as shown here. And a neuron spikes if the membrane potential crosses a threshold or if the spontaneous rate is greater than some threshold. Each spiking neuron has a spontaneous rate with which it automatically generates spikes, and this is particularly useful as it helps the bot explore the environment in the absence of uh, an input like food. Let's now talk about the environment itself. So the environment is actually a square of 500 by 500 units, and the walls are reflected, which means the food and balls are reflected off the walls. So when the bots run into vertical walls, their angle is changed by some amount, and when they run into horizontal walls, their angle is changed by some other amount. And the details are mentioned here as well as in the paper. Once a food is captured by a bot, it is randomly placed at a new instance with a randomly chosen speed. Let's now describe the process flow of how the entire system of bots work. So the neuron fires as per input from sensory neurons or the spontaneous rate, and then the output neurons produce an action for the bot by firing, and then based on the uh, output neuron which fired, a particular action is taken, and that's how a bot moves. Let's talk about the algorithms that we use to train these spiking neural networks. So we use genetic algorithms to train the spiking neural networks, and we use two evolutionary inheritance algorithms. The first one is the mutation only variant, and the second one is crossover with mutation variant. So although genetic algorithms come in a variety of flavors, the general structure of the algorithm is provided here, and more details about the inner workings of this algorithm are provided in the paper. So shown here are the two evolutionary algorithms. One is a mutation-only variant, and this one is a crossover mutation variant. And shown here is a variant of the crossover operation that happens on the weight matrices. So although we have a 4 by 4 matrix here, in practice we actually have a 30 by 30 weight matrix because there are 30 neurons in our brain. Let's now talk about the various simulations that we perform to evaluate the efficacy of our algorithms under this multi-agent ER setup. The variance of evolutionary algorithms are evaluated by measuring the average number of times taken needed by a bot to capture the food at each generation. And the fitness function that we use to decide the removal of the bots is given by F, which basically is the number of times a bot ate food in its lifetime. The environment size is 500 by 500 units, and the number of training iterations or generations are 10,000. The number of bots are 10, and the number of folds are 5. Let's now look at a video of how the training happens. So in the early generations, the bots just pursue random behavior, and as seen in this video, some of the bots move sideways or even backwards. They do not know how to approach or how to consume food. As they reach, as they proceed with their generations, they start learning pretty quickly, and as soon as a food appears in the bot's field of view, the bot rushes towards the food in an attempt to capture it. And as we approach the later generations, we see that the bots are extremely efficient at capturing food, and whenever the food comes in the bot's field of view, it immediately captures it. So let's get to the evaluations first. We'll now talk about the mutation-only variant. So in this case, the solutions are evolved only through mutation, which means that we essentially change the weights and biases of our SNN, which is each individual component of our weight matrix, the spontaneous firing rate, and the visual angle of our bot in the following manner as described in this algorithm. And the training plot of time steps to food versus generations is given here. And the function that we use to fit our training curve is given over here. The mutation parameters are also described here and are also described in detail in the paper. Let's now talk about the crossover with mutation variant. In this case, we first perform the crossover operation, and then later we perform the mutation operation once the crossover operations are completed. The figure on the left shows the average time took for Arjun captured food under the crossover and mutation variant. It can be observed that the bots learn quickly, and after about 500 generations, the average time to food reduces significantly. So two metrics are derived and the algorithms are compared with each other based on these metrics. The first metric is called the inflection point, while the second one is called the convergence point. The inflection point basically reflects the learning rate of the algorithm, while the convergence point is the average number of time steps taken to eat foods after training. So we perform 100 runs for each evolutionary algorithm variant to ensure statistically significant results. We see that the mean inflection point for the mutation-only algorithm is about 500 generations, while the mean inflection point for the crossover plus mutation variant is about 300 generations. And hence we can conclude that the crossover with mutation inflects faster than just mutation variant with statistical significance. The convergence point, on the other hand, actually shows some interesting results. In case of the crossover with mutation variant, the distribution is clearly bimodal, while in case of the mutation-only variant, the distribution is unimodal. And we find that mutation finds the global optimum more reliably than crossover with mutation with statistically significant results. And here is just a tabular representation and the summary of results for both the evolutionary strategies. And let's now talk about the conclusion and the discussion pertaining to it. So crossover mutation promotes 40% faster learning in SNN than mere mutation with a statistically significant margin. Future directions to this work may lead to integration of evolutionary approaches with in-lifetime learning models like reinforcement learning. And evolutionary approaches could be used to generate the reward mechanism for reinforcement learning models or learning models that use spike timing dependent plasticity. Exploring the network topology as a function of evolutionary generations is also one of the future directions of this work. And we again strongly believe that evolutionary approach sets the reward mechanism that could be used for reinforcement learning. Um, Lastly, I would like to thank the reviewers and the editors of the conference for allowing us to uh, demonstrate our work here. And I would highly encourage everyone to go ahead and read our paper titled Training Spiking Neural Networks with a Multi-Agent Evolutionary Robotics Framework that has been accepted for the GECCO 2021 conference. Um, Thank you so much. I would like to thank the editors, the reviewers, and last but not the least, I would like to thank my co-authors, Dr. Das, as well as Dr. Aggarwal. Thank you, everyone.